I hadn't seen my son in nearly 6 months, and I'd decided it was time to fix that. The plan was simple: surprise him after work, bring his favorite lemon pie, and take him out for dinner. I even wore my favorite scarf, the one he bought me on a trip to Venice when he was in college. It still smelled faintly of his cologne from that trip, though I knew that was just memory playing tricks on me. His office parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived just before sunset, the golden light stretching long shadows across the pavement. I parked my car around the corner and spotted his silver SUV near the back of the lot. I carried the pie carefully and tiptoed over, heart fluttering with excitement, like a girl about to sneak into a birthday party. I'd meant to tap on the driver's window and shout, "Surprise!" like we used to when he was little and came home from school. But before I reached the door, I noticed someone sitting in the passenger seat, and I instinctively ducked. Then I heard a voice I wasn't supposed to hear, and everything changed. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I told you, once the paperwork's finalized, she won't be a problem anymore, the woman said coolly. My first thought was confusion. Who was she? Then I recognized my son's voice replying, flat and firm. Good. She'll think we're just updating the will. She always signs what I give her. The woman chuckled, low and bitter. Does she even realize the condo's already in your name? Nope, my son replied. I told her it was just a transfer for tax benefits. My hands trembled, and I crouched lower, hidden behind the rear wheel, heart thundering in my ears. You don't think she suspects anything? The woman asked. Not a chance, he said. Mom's always been trusting to a fault. Mom, he was talking about me. I felt the pie tilt in my hands and caught it just in time before it slipped from the box. A sharp coldness settled into my chest, like ice, forming around my ribs. The woman in the car, the one sitting next to my son, leaned forward and said, She signed power of attorney over to you last year, right? Right after Dad died, my son confirmed. I told her it was for emergencies, just in case she ever ended up in the hospital or something. And she believed you. Of course. She was crying every night back then, barely eating, couldn't focus on anything. The woman laughed again. You really played her, didn't you? It's not playing, he said sharply. It's protecting what's mine. And that was when I stood up, still unseen, but no longer unsure of what I had heard. I didn't recognize the woman, but she sounded familiar in that insincere, polished kind of way. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, and she had a voice like someone who gave presentations for a living. Once we get her into a facility, she was saying, we'll have total access. I can finally start the business without worrying about her ruining everything. She won't ruin anything, my son replied. She'll be happy at Glenwood. They've got bingo nights and soft food. She'll love it. You do know she still thinks you're this angel of a son, right? That's the beauty of it, he said. She won't see it coming. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. My knees ached from crouching, but my pride hurt far worse. They were planning to erase me from my own life. I waited until they drove off before I moved. The pie was still in one piece, though it looked like it had shifted in the box. I sat in my own car, windows rolled up, hands shaking so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. My son. My only child. The boy I'd raised alone after his father died of cancer when he was 10. The boy I worked 2 jobs to put through school. The boy I drove to every soccer game, every band concert, every job interview. I'd trusted him with everything, my grief, my finances, my home. And now he was planning to lock me away and steal what was left of my life. I didn't cry, not yet. The tears would come later, when I could afford to fall apart. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the kitchen floor in my slippers, rubbing my hands together until they were raw. Glenwood wasn't a retirement community. It was a managed care facility, one of those cold, clinical places that smelled like antiseptic and regret. I knew because I'd visited a neighbor there once after her stroke. She'd wept the moment I walked in. Don't let them put you here, she had whispered. I hadn't understood what she meant until now. I opened my file cabinet and pulled out every document my son had ever asked me to sign. There were dozens, legal-looking papers with complicated language I'd barely read. I'd trusted him, signed where he told me to sign. I poured myself a cup of tea I never drank. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Helena Kane, whose ad I remembered from a pamphlet at the library. Elder law specialist. It had said in bold letters. When I explained what I'd overheard, she went very quiet. "You need to come in," she said, "and bring every document you can find." Her office was downtown, tucked above a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and secrets. Helena was younger than I expected, with short curly hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my story without interrupting once, then leaned back in her chair. "This is classic financial abuse," she said. "He's using your trust to gain control, and once you're declared incompetent, it becomes much harder to reverse anything." My stomach turned at the word incompetent. "I'm not incompetent," I whispered. Helena nodded. "Then let's make sure no one can pretend you are." We made a plan. First, I'd have my physician do a full cognitive assessment to establish my competence. Next, Helena would begin filing motions to challenge the power of attorney and freeze any joint accounts. We'd document everything: dates, signatures, discrepancies. She advised me to act as though nothing had changed, to keep up the facade with my son until we had enough evidence. "Don't let him know you're onto him," she warned. "If he senses it, he may accelerate the process." I nodded, though every part of me wanted to scream in his face. I was a school teacher for 30 years. I knew how to act. I could pretend. But I'd be damned if I let my own son steal the life I'd built. That weekend, he came over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. "You've been quiet lately, Mom," he said as he unpacked the food. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I replied with a small smile. "Getting older isn't what it's cracked up to be." He laughed, warm and easy, and I hated how convincing he was. We ate at the dining table Frank built when we first got married, and I watched him, trying to find the boy I used to know. He told me about his work, about some new project, about long-term investments. I sipped my wine and kept my tone light. "I've been thinking about doing some financial spring cleaning," I said. "Maybe going over those forms you helped me with." His eyes flickered for a split second before the smile returned. "You don't need to worry about any of that, Mom. I've got everything under control." I nodded slowly, watching the way he avoided eye contact when he said it. He always did that when he lied as a boy, shifting his gaze just slightly to the left. "I know you do," I said, carefully folding my napkin. "It's just that sometimes I feel a little out of the loop, you know." He reached for the soy sauce and chuckled. "That's because I'm trying to protect you from stress, Mom." That word again, protect, when what he really meant was control. "Still," I said, my voice even, "I'd like to review some of the documents you had me sign after your father passed." His hand froze mid-air for just a second before he resumed pouring sauce onto his rice. "Of course, we can go over them sometime next week," he said smoothly. "I'll bring everything over, maybe Friday afternoon." "That would be lovely," I lied, smiling as I passed him the fortune cookies. After he left, I sat in my living room with the lights off, letting the quiet settle over me like dust. I thought about the man my son had become. Calculated, smooth-talking, and deeply entitled. And I thought about how much of that was my fault. I'd raised him to believe in himself, to speak with confidence, to pursue his dreams. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned that love could be exploited, and trust could be weaponized. I'd given him everything: my time, my savings, my faith, and now he was using it all against me. The boy who once made me breakfast on Mother's Day with eggshells in the pancakes was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as an obstacle, not a parent. Someone who thought he could outwit me. Someone who was about to learn that I wasn't nearly as fragile as he believed. By Wednesday, Helena had reviewed the documents I brought her, and the results were worse than I imagined. "You're technically not even a co-owner on your own house anymore," she said, spreading the papers across her desk. "Your name appears only in reference to occupancy, not ownership." I blinked at the pages, each one signed in handwriting that looked eerily like mine. "But I never saw these versions before," I whispered, a chill running down my spine. "He told me they were for refinancing." "You've been systematically removed from your assets," Helena said gently. "Checking, savings, the condo, and even the small trust fund your husband left behind. It's all legally under your son's name now. I rubbed my temples, trying to breathe evenly through the rising nausea. How could I not have seen this happening? Because grief makes people trust too quickly, she said softly, and because your son made sure you stayed just distracted enough. Helena's office arranged for a forensic handwriting analyst to review the documents. They suspected at least 2 of the signature pages were traced or modified from older paperwork I'd actually signed. It's hard to prove outright forgery, Helena cautioned, but it strengthens our case for undue influence and fraud. I agreed to a full medical evaluation and passed with flying colors, no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. My doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, even wrote me a glowing letter of competence. "You're sharper than most of my patients in their 40s, she joked, patting my hand. I smiled politely, though there was nothing humorous about what I was facing. Once Helena had the letter, she filed an emergency motion to temporarily freeze all asset transfers related to my name. She also requested an injunction to prevent my son from making further changes to my accounts or initiating any sale of my home. It'll take a week or so for the court to respond, she said, but the paperwork is in." I thanked her, gripping her hand harder than I meant to, grateful and terrified at the same time. On Thursday, I received a call from a real estate agent named Colin Mercer, asking about scheduling an appraisal. "I just wanted to confirm that Friday at 2 o'clock works for you," he said cheerily. "For the condo evaluation, Marcus said you'd be home." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you evaluating it for?" "The listing prep," he said, sounding puzzled. "He said you were planning to move into assisted living." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice suddenly sharp. "The condo is not for sale." "Oh, well, I'll follow up with Marcus," Colin said quickly, now clearly uncomfortable. "Thanks for your time." I hung up and stared at the phone like it had betrayed me. My son wasn't just planning to trick me, he'd already set the wheels in motion. That evening, I baked lemon muffins, the ones Marcus used to love when he was younger. I didn't know why I made them, maybe because baking made me feel in control again. The house smelled like comfort and memory, like Sunday mornings before the world turned sour. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the muffins lined up in a neat row, as if they had answers hidden inside. I thought about how much had changed in just 1 week, how quickly the mask had slipped off my own child. I imagined the conversation he might have with that woman again, whoever she was, celebrating my swift removal from the picture. And I imagined the smug look on his face as he deposited the proceeds from my home sale into his account. The image made my stomach clench, and I pushed the muffins away. I wasn't going to let him win. Not quietly, not kindly, and definitely not with lemon muffins in the oven. When Friday came, I dressed carefully, choosing a light blue blouse and a gray cardigan, the kind my students used to say made me look teacherish. I wanted to look every bit the composed, cooperative, and competent woman the law required me to be. I even set out tea and the untouched muffins in case Marcus arrived early and suspected nothing. He came right at noon, briefcase in hand, his expression as bright and fake as a department store Santa. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look nice today." "Thank you," I replied, steadying my voice. "Tea?" "Sure," he said, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. As I poured his cup, I noticed the tip of a manila folder peeking from the case, paperwork for something, no doubt, and likely not in my best interest. We made small talk for 15 minutes. Weather, traffic, some new Thai place he wanted to try, and then he got to it. "So, Mom," he began, reaching for the folder. "I brought a few forms to look over, just to make sure we're on the same page moving forward." "What kind of forms?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just some minor financial housekeeping," he said, opening the folder and flipping through the pages. "Updating your status on the deed, consolidating a few accounts, that sort of thing." "Didn't we do all that already?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Well, yes," he said smoothly, "but some of the paperwork had errors we're correcting." "And this has nothing to do with selling the condo?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard for half a second. "Of course not," he lied. I handed him his tea and smiled sweetly. He took a long sip of his tea and seemed to relax. mistaking my calmness for ignorance. I watched him scan the papers, flipping one to the next with an easy rhythm, as if rehearsed. "This one just needs your signature at the bottom," he said, sliding a page toward me. "I can explain everything if you'd like, but it's all standard stuff." I tilted my head and picked up the pen beside the folder, my fingers brushing the paper. "Why don't you walk me through it anyway?" I asked, voice sweet as honey. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face before he began reciting the legal jargon like a sales pitch. His tone was casual, but his eyes didn't leave my face. He was watching to see if I flinched, if I questioned, if I faltered. I did none of those things. I just smiled and let him talk, knowing full well he was walking into a trap of his own making. When he finally pushed the signature line toward me again, I met his gaze and paused. "I'd like Helena to take a look at these first," I said, setting the pen down. His smile faltered for half a second, then returned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Who's Helena?" he asked, his voice laced with false innocence. "My attorney?" I said simply. "I've hired her to help me get a better grasp of my finances." The silence that followed was heavy and brittle, like thin ice beneath a boot. "You don't need an attorney, Mom," he said quietly, the warmth gone now. "I've handled everything for years. You said you trusted me." "I did," I replied, standing slowly. And then I started listening more carefully. "Listening to who?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I walked to the fireplace and picked up the picture of Frank and me on our wedding day. My thumb brushed over his smile, the one that always said, "You'll figure it out, Dot." "You always do." Marcus remained seated, his hand resting stiffly on the stack of forged trust. "Why don't you tell me what you've really been doing with my accounts?" I asked, not turning around. "Why don't you tell me about the real estate agent who called me 2 days ago?" Still, he said nothing, so I continued. "He said you'd scheduled an appraisal. Told him I'd be home Friday at 2 o'clock. I turned then, facing him. "That's today, Marcus." His jaw clenched, and I saw something slip behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just the fear of being caught. "You're being dramatic," he said, standing now, his voice edged with frustration. "I was trying to get things moving for you. You've been stuck since Dad died." "So you decided to move me out of my own home?" I asked. "To what? Glenwood? You think I don't know about the deposit you made?" He looked stunned, then angry, then back to blank as he tried to recalibrate. "I don't know what you think you know, but this is for your own good," he snapped. "That's not your decision to make," I said calmly. "You don't get to rewrite my life just because you're tired of waiting for your inheritance," he scoffed, but it didn't carry the confidence it used to. "You're twisting everything I've done." "No, Marcus," I said firmly. "I'm finally seeing it for what it is." He grabbed his briefcase and shoved the documents back inside with jerky movements. "You've let someone fill your head with nonsense," he muttered, almost to himself. "You used to appreciate everything I did for you." "I still appreciate the son I raised," I said, holding his gaze. "I just don't recognize the man who replaced him." He looked at me then, not like a son looking at his mother, but like a man who'd lost control of the situation. "You think you've won something here?" he asked bitterly. "This is just going to make things worse for you, not better." "No," I said, stepping closer. "The worst thing already happened. I realized my own child was trying to erase me." He didn't have a response for that. After he left, I called Helena immediately and told her everything. She was already working with the court clerk to expedite our filings. "He's likely going to try and move fast now," she warned. "Possibly even take more drastic steps." "Like what?" I asked, my stomach nodding. "Changing locks, removing you from medical decisions, pushing for an emergency incompetence claim. Can he do that?" "He can try, but now we have documentation and the court on notice," she said. "Just don't be alone with him again, Dot, and if anything changes, call me day or night." I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of the battle settling onto my shoulders. That night, I couldn't sleep again, so I sat in the living room with Frank's favorite blanket across my lap. The wind rattled the windows, and I imagined it carrying pieces of my old life away with every gust. I thought of the trust I'd handed over so freely, not just legally, but emotionally. I thought about how many mothers out there had sons who turned out to be strangers in disguise. I wished I could tell them to listen harder, to question sooner, to never stop being the person who double-checks everything, even when it's from family. Around midnight, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not out of fear, but grief. Grief for the mother I used to be, the son I thought I had, and the future I'd foolishly believed was safe. I cried until the ache in my chest loosened, and then I wiped my face and whispered into the darkness, "You'll have to fight harder than that, Marcus." And I meant every word. The next morning, the doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock, and I felt my pulse spike. Through the peephole, I saw a sharply dressed woman with a clipboard and a tired expression. "Good morning, Mrs. Lambert?" she asked when I cracked the door open. "I'm Karen from Glenwood Senior Living. We had an appointment today to tour the facility." My spine stiffened, but I kept my voice even. "I never scheduled an appointment with you." She looked confused, then flipped her page. "It says here your son arranged it. Said you were eager to transition soon." "Well, your information is wrong," I said, stepping forward. "There won't be any tour today, or ever." "I understand," she said awkwardly. "I'll let him know." "Please do," I replied, and then shut the door firmly in her face. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. I stood there for a moment after closing the door, my hand still on the knob. My heart was racing, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. Marcus hadn't wasted a second. He'd scheduled a tour at Glenwood without even pretending to ask me first. I walked to the kitchen, flipped open my notebook, and jotted the date, time, and the woman's name, Karen, clipboard, 8 a.m. Every incident needed to be recorded, every push he made toward stripping away my agency. The notebook was already 3 pages full, but this morning's ambush deserved its own paragraph. I called Helena again, and she picked up on the first ring. Her voice clipped and alert. "He tried to force a Glenwood appointment this morning," I said without preamble. "A woman showed up at my door. Clipboard, name badge, everything." "He's accelerating," Helena muttered, more to herself than to me. "We'll file for a temporary restraining order today." By noon, I was sitting in Helena's office with a printed copy of my Glenwood visitor log. She'd already drafted the paperwork to freeze the house deed, cancel all active listings, and legally block Marcus from making decisions on my behalf. "He's going to be furious," I said, watching her staple the final page. "Let him be," Helena replied without hesitation. "Anger means he knows he's losing." I signed the documents without hesitation, a firm stroke with no tremble in my hand. When I looked up, Helena was watching me with a small smile. "You know," she said, "you're handling this better than most." "I was a teacher for 30 years, I replied. "I've dealt with worse tantrums than Marcus's." We both laughed, but the sound felt more like armor than joy. By Friday evening, I had 2 voicemails from Marcus and one from an unknown number that I assumed was Vanessa. I didn't listen to any of them. I sat in my chair, knitting needles clicking steadily in my hands, the television on low but ignored. The yarn I worked with was the same soft lavender color as the cardigan I wore when Frank and I brought Marcus home from the hospital. Each stitch calmed my nerves, one loop at a time, anchoring me to the present. I knew Marcus would come back, probably angry, possibly desperate, and I had to be ready. I kept my phone on silent, and my doors locked. The garden lights clicked on automatically at dusk, and I watched their soft glow filter through the blinds. The night was quiet, but my instincts were alert, waiting for the next knock. Nothing came. Saturday morning brought sunshine and an unexpected email from a contact Helena had connected me with, Ruth Hamlin, a forensic financial consultant. Her message was brief, polite, efficient, and deadly serious. "I've begun reviewing the transactions tied to your accounts," she wrote. "There are multiple flagged items we need to discuss immediately." I clicked through the attached summary, and my jaw clenched at the numbers. Dozens of transfers had been made from my personal savings into Marcus's business accounts over the last 18 months. Some were labeled loan reimbursements, others marketing expenses, but none of them had my initials or approval. Ruth's note ended with a quiet but powerful warning. This level of movement, coupled with power of attorney misuse, points to deliberate financial exploitation. I replied at once, confirming a Monday morning call. I stared at the screen long after the reply was sent, feeling a strange mix of rage and relief. That evening, I went through the filing cabinet again, pulling out an old manila folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters from Frank, handwritten ones he'd left me around the house during the early years of our marriage. I found one folded between a recipe and a tax form, written in his looping cursive on yellowed paper. "Dot," it began, "if you're reading this, I hope you're still the strong woman I married. But just in case you've forgotten, remember, you've always had a fire inside you. Don't let anyone, not even family, tell you your time is over." I read that line 3 times, letting the words settle over me like armor. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the notebook with my legal records. Frank had known me better than anyone else ever could. Sunday passed in a haze of preparation. I made copies of every relevant form, scanned documents onto a flash drive, and stored backups in a lockbox. Linda, my sister who lived 2 hours away, called that afternoon after I left her a message the night before. "Dot," she said as soon as she answered, "what's going on?" I told her everything about Marcus, the deception, the recordings, and the legal battle now underway. She didn't interrupt once, and when I finished, her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I always thought he was too smooth for his own good, but I never imagined this." "Neither did I replied. "But I'm dealing with it now. Do you want me to come?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I'll let you know when I do." Just after dusk on Sunday, I spotted a car idling across the street. It wasn't familiar, and had stayed there for nearly 40 minutes before finally pulling away. I wrote down the license plate, just in case, and informed Helena the next morning. "He's watching the house," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "That's intimidation," she said, her voice clipped. "I'll include it in the restraining order request." The hearing was set for Wednesday, and we both knew Marcus wouldn't take it well. "If he tries to visit before then, call the police," Helena reminded me. "Do not open your door and don't engage him directly." I nodded, then whispered the words I'd been practicing all weekend. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," and I meant it. When Wednesday morning came, I wore the same scarf Marcus had given me after his first big job offer. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I wanted to reclaim the meaning of it. At the courthouse, Helena met me on the steps, her briefcase swinging like a weapon at her side. "We've got everything," she said. "His financials, your competency evaluation, the forensic report, and the voicemail transcripts." The courtroom was small, intimate, almost too quiet. Marcus sat at the opposite table, his expression carefully composed, but lacking the ease he usually wore like cologne. He didn't look at me, and I didn't look at him. Instead, I focused on the judge, the truth, and the years of dignity I refused to let him erase. When the bailiff called our case, I stood tall and steady, heart pounding. It was time to speak. Not just for myself, but for every woman who ever trusted too much and lived to regret it. The judge was a tall, sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Grant, and from the moment she entered the courtroom, silence fell like a curtain. She looked between the 2 tables, her gaze steady and unreadable, then gestured for Helena to proceed. Helena stood with calm authority and began laying out the facts like bricks in a wall. She introduced the notarized documents Marcus had filed, the ones that transferred my assets quietly into his name. She then presented the forensic handwriting analysis, noting discrepancies in pressure patterns and angle consistency. The judge raised an eyebrow at that, then nodded once, as if filing it away for later. Next came the voicemail transcript and the screenshots of the attempted Glenwood appointment I never scheduled. "This isn't a misunderstanding," Helena said clearly. "It's a coordinated effort to remove Mrs. Lambert from her own life." I didn't flinch, though Marcus finally looked up at me across the room. When it was Marcus's attorney's turn, he stood slowly and attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "With respect," he began, "what we have here is a tragic case of miscommunication between a grieving mother and her devoted son." He painted me as forgetful, overwhelmed, a widow vulnerable to outside influence. I listened quietly as he implied I'd misunderstood every document I'd signed, that Marcus had merely streamlined my affairs to help me. He didn't call me incompetent directly, but he walked the line carefully, suggesting my memory might not be what it once was. Marcus kept his expression neutral, eyes focused on the table, as if pretending not to hear the lies being told for his benefit. Helena didn't interrupt, didn't even react. She simply waited, letting the rope grow longer. The judge took note silently, one hand tapping her pen on the armrest. And as for the Glenwood appointment, the attorney added, Mr. Lambert was only following through on what he believed were his mother's wishes. That was when I finally looked up and met my son's eyes. He looked away. Judge Grant leaned forward slightly when Helena introduced my medical evaluation. Dr. Patel is a board-certified internist with over 20 years of experience, Helena said. Her report clearly states that Mrs. Lambert shows no signs of cognitive decline. She handed the judge the paperwork, and I saw Marcus's jaw tighten. Additionally, Helena continued, we have a sworn affidavit from the real estate agent Mr. Lambert contacted, Colin Mercer, confirming that Marcus attempted to list the property without his mother's explicit consent. Is Mr. Mercer present today? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Helena replied, gesturing to the back of the room. Colin stood and nodded, his nervousness evident but his resolve solid. The judge thanked him and returned her attention to the table. I've seen enough to make a preliminary ruling, she said. And I must say, I find this behavior troubling. The judge's voice grew firmer as she continued. Mr. Lambert, you've operated under a legal power of attorney which comes with serious responsibilities. You are not permitted to make self-serving decisions at the expense of the grantor. Marcus looked up again, his expression carefully blank. The court is placing a temporary freeze on all accounts and assets tied to Mrs. Lambert, Judge Grant declared. Effective immediately, Mr. Lambert's power of attorney is suspended pending a full review. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Helena placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. Furthermore, the judge added, I am issuing a protective order preventing Mr. Lambert from initiating any legal or medical changes on his mother's behalf. A murmur rippled through the room, and Marcus's attorney asked to approach the bench. The judge waved him off. Motion denied. We're not done here. When we left the courtroom, the sunlight outside felt different. Sharper, almost defiant. Helena and I walked down the courthouse steps in silence, the weight of the moment still settling on my shoulders. I'd won a battle, but not the war. Not yet. Marcus didn't say a word to me as he left through a separate door, his pace brisk and his shoulders tight. I wondered if he'd go straight to Vanessa or to his lawyer to begin crafting the next manipulation. He's going to fight this, Helena warned as we reached the parking lot. But we've got the advantage now. Don't respond to anything from him directly. Route it all through me. I understand, I said, opening my car door with hands that no longer trembled. Let him try whatever he wants. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. That evening, I met with Ruth Hamlin over coffee at her small office just outside the city. She was younger than I expected, with dark hair in a braid and a laptop that never seemed to stop typing. I wanted to show you what we found in Marcus's business account, she said, swiveling the screen toward me. A list of withdrawals and deposits appeared, dates, amounts, categories, all neatly sorted. Over the last 12 months, he transferred just over $118,000 from accounts you previously controlled, Ruth explained. About half was funneled through a business shell before being used to pay personal debts. She clicked on another tab, and here's where it gets really interesting. Multiple payments to an account registered to Vanessa Harrow. Harrow? I asked, confused. I thought her last name was something else. Brooks was a former alias. She's used both, but Harrow is her legal name. My pulse quickened as the pieces started connecting. Ruth pulled up a public record database, showing me a scan of an old court file. Vanessa Harrow was involved in a similar case 3 years ago, she said, pointing to the screen. She married an older man, Roger Harrow, who died 8 months after changing his will in her favor. Did she face charges? I asked. No. His children filed a civil suit, but it was settled quietly. She's done this before, I whispered. Yes, Ruth confirmed, and she's not done yet. My stomach turned as I remembered the woman's voice in the car. The laughter, the confidence, the way she talked about me like I was already gone. We're going to need more than financials, Ruth added. We're going to need witnesses and a full timeline of everything. I spent the next 3 days combing through every piece of mail, every receipt, every calendar note I'd kept since Frank died. I printed emails, highlighted phone bills, and clipped everything to organized folders with labels in red ink. I called Linda again and asked her to visit, and she arrived Friday afternoon with a suitcase and a thermos of sweet tea. I'm staying until this is done, she said without waiting for an invitation. We spent hours in the living room going over documents, dates, and conversations. You know, she said after a long pause, Marcus always hated not being in control. He always needed to be the center of everything. I agreed. But Frank kept him grounded, she added softly. And when Frank died, I nodded slowly. He saw an opening, and he took it, she finished. But we're closing it now. That weekend, I filed for full revocation of the power of attorney and submitted a sworn affidavit detailing the timeline of Marcus's manipulation. Helena added witness statements from Linda, Dr. Patel, Colin Mercer, and even Irene, the bakery owner, who'd noticed Vanessa and Marcus coming in regularly for over a year. The picture we were painting was undeniable, a calculated, slow-burn plan to isolate, deceive, and dismantle my autonomy. The last piece was a background report Helena requested on Vanessa, which would be delivered Monday. We all suspected what it would say, but the confirmation was still necessary. As Sunday evening rolled in, I stood on the back porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun disappear behind the hills. The wind was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, so was my mind. This wasn't just about saving my home anymore. It was about proving I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Monday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation so thick I could feel it in my bones. Helena called just after 9, her voice brisk but pleased. Vanessa's background report came in, and it's worse than we thought, she said. I set my teacup down slowly, heart thudding against my ribs. Tell me everything. Aside from the Harrow case, she's linked to 2 other elderly men, both financially drained before their sudden deaths. Any convictions? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. No convictions, just civil settlements and sealed records. But the patterns are consistent. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the garden Frank and I had planted together. She doesn't just prey on people, I said, my voice low. She builds a future out of other people's endings. Linda listened quietly as I relayed the details, her face pale but determined. We're dealing with professionals, she said, folding her arms. Marcus may be the front, but Vanessa is the engine behind this whole operation. That's what it looks like, I agreed, retrieving the binder where I kept our compiled evidence. She knew exactly how to position herself, first emotionally, then financially. Like a vulture, Linda muttered. Worse, I replied. Vultures wait until you're dead. She tries to make sure you get there faster. We fell into a tense silence, both of us considering what might have happened if I hadn't overheard that conversation in the car. We're going to finish this, Linda said. One move at a time. I nodded, and a strange calm settled over me, like something inside had finally snapped into place. The next day, I received a call from Glenwood's administrator, a man named Harold Bryce. Mrs. Lambert, he began awkwardly, I understand there's been some confusion regarding your placement. You could say that, I replied, keeping my tone cool. Someone attempted to admit me without my knowledge or consent. We've halted the application and flagged your file, he said quickly. Mr. Lambert made a substantial deposit under the assumption that you'd be moving in by the end of the month. He assumed wrong, I said flatly. We'll refund the deposit to your account directly, Mr. Bryce offered. It didn't come from my account, I said. I suggest you return it to whoever provided it and make a note that any future communications must go through my attorney. Understood, he replied, clearly rattled. And Mrs. Lambert, I'm sorry this happened. I hung up and added that phone call to the log. By Thursday, our restraining order had been approved and served to Marcus. According to Helena, he hadn't taken it well. He showed up at her office unannounced, demanding to speak to me and insisting everything was a big mistake, Her assistant escorted him out, and the security camera footage was added to our file. "He's unraveling," Helena told me that afternoon. "They didn't expect you to fight back." "Good," I said simply. "Let them wonder what else I know." That same day, I received a courier envelope containing a letter from Marcus. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and folded neatly inside a heavy cream envelope. "Dear Mom," it began, "I don't know what happened to the trust between us." I stopped reading after that line and handed the letter to Helena. "We're past apologies," I told her. "This isn't personal anymore. It's legal." Friday morning brought another surprise when Ruth called me from her office, her voice tight. "I think you need to see this in person," she said. I drove there immediately, Linda insisting on coming with me. When we arrived, Ruth had already printed the newest batch of flagged transactions. "Vanessa opened a new account last week in Colorado," she said, pointing at the screen. "It's under her legal name, Vanessa Harrow, but Marcus has been transferring funds there in increments just below the reporting threshold." "Is that laundering?" Linda asked. "Not exactly, but it's an attempt to hide money and avoid triggering scrutiny," Ruth replied. "They're moving the money out of state," I whispered, cold creeping into my spine. "They were going to disappear after selling my house." "That's what it looks like," Ruth confirmed grimly. "But we caught them before they could finish." That weekend, Helena filed a petition for a full financial audit of Marcus's business and personal accounts. We also submitted a criminal complaint against both Marcus and Vanessa for elder financial abuse and fraud. The evidence was now overwhelming: illegal transfers, attempted concealment, and deliberate exploitation of a senior. I'd gone from near helpless victim to key witness in a criminal case, and the shift felt surreal. My days were filled with meetings, statements, notarizations, and interviews with investigators. Linda stayed by my side, her presence both comforting and grounding. "You always took care of everyone," she said one night as we organized another folder. "Now it's our turn to take care of you." I smiled, not because I felt saved, but because I no longer felt alone. "Frank would be proud," I said quietly. "And he'd be sharpening the edge of a shovel in the garage." Monday morning, the district attorney's office called to inform us that formal charges had been filed. Marcus and Vanessa were to be served that day with subpoenas and criminal indictments. Helena said Marcus's attorney had already requested a private meeting to, quote, "discuss possible resolutions," which meant they knew the case was solid. "No deals," I told her firmly. "I want this heard in court." "You may not get that option," she said, though she sounded impressed, "but I'll make sure the charges stick either way." That night, Linda and I sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the stars. "It's strange," I murmured. "What is?" she asked. "That I've been more alive these last few weeks than I have in years." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes you have to nearly lose everything to remember what you're still made of." Just before bed, I checked my voicemail one last time and found a new message. It was Vanessa. "Dorothy," she began, using a voice that was too soft, too polished, too familiar. "This has gone far enough. You're hurting Marcus, and I don't think you understand how fragile he's become." I sat down slowly, letting the voice wash over me like oil slick. "You don't want to do this," she continued. "You're going to regret making this public. Let's talk privately and work something out. You were always kind to me, and I'd like to return that kindness." The message ended with silence, followed by a mechanical beep. I deleted it without hesitation and whispered to the empty room, "You mistook kindness for weakness." Then I turned off the phone and went to bed. By Tuesday morning, the news had reached local press. A brief article appeared online under the headline, "Local Business Owner Under Investigation for Financial Exploitation of Elderly Mother." There were no names mentioned yet, but anyone who knew us wouldn't need help connecting the dots. I sat at the breakfast table with my tea growing cold, rereading the article while Linda stirred her oatmeal silently across from me. "It's starting," I said quietly. "It's already started," she replied, not looking up. I thought about calling Marcus just once to ask him why. But then I remembered the voicemail from Vanessa, that polished threat disguised as concern. No, I thought, he'd made his choice the moment he forged my signature and called it love. "The court hearing is in 6 days," Helena had reminded me earlier. That's when the real fire begins. I was ready for it. Wednesday afternoon brought a knock on the door that made my pulse spike until I saw the familiar flash of a badge through the window. Officer Menard had been assigned to check on me twice a week as part of the protective order enforcement. "Just making sure you're still above ground and feisty," he said with a half-smile. I appreciated his dry humor. It kept the dread from settling too deeply in my bones. "All clear," I told him, stepping back so he could peek inside. "No strange visitors, no uninvited real estate agents, and definitely no unsolicited tours of assisted living facilities." "Glad to hear it," he said, flipping open his notepad. The DA's office confirmed that Marcus was served yesterday. Vanessa, too. She tried to slam the door, but our guy's pretty quick with his foot. I smiled for the first time that day. Later that evening, I sat in the den going through old photo albums, trying to remind myself that my son hadn't always been a stranger. There he was at 5, smiling beside a Halloween pumpkin with his front teeth missing. There again at 12, holding up a spelling bee trophy with wild pride in his eyes. And again at 17, standing in a tuxedo beside me before prom, his hand on my shoulder. The boy in those photos was real, sweet, flawed, and human. But somewhere along the way, ambition had eaten kindness, and greed had filled the space where love used to live. "He didn't start out this way," I said aloud. "He was good once." Linda looked up from her crossword. "Maybe he still is, somewhere, deep down," she offered. "Or maybe," I said quietly, "some people just get good at pretending." Thursday morning, Vanessa was arrested on a separate charge unrelated to me, but it worked in our favor. Tax evasion linked to a previous settlement. Helena explained during our call. She thought the court would never follow up because the case was sealed, but someone must have tipped them off. I didn't ask who had tipped them off, though I had my suspicions. Vanessa's mugshot appeared online by mid-afternoon, her smug confidence replaced by fury wrapped in foundation. She made bail by dinner, but it didn't matter. The damage was done, her armor had cracked, and the wolves were sniffing the gaps. "She's going to turn on Marcus," Linda predicted, pouring us both another cup of coffee. "She's not going to take the fall for both of them." "Good," I said, watching the steam rise. "Let them devour each other." That night, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Karen, an old neighbor from our cul-de-sac when Marcus was a teen. "I saw the news. It began. I don't know if you remember, but Marcus once offered to help my mother with her retirement portfolio. Something didn't feel right, and she declined." Karen explained how she'd always had a strange feeling about Vanessa, too, how the woman seemed more rehearsed than real. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry you're going through this," she finished. "If you need a witness statement about Marcus's past behavior, I'm happy to provide one." I stared at the screen, moved by the simple kindness of a message that didn't try to fix anything, just offered support. "Thank you," I typed back. "That means more than you know." I forwarded the email to Helena, knowing it might become one more brick in the wall we were building. Friday arrived like a weight pressed against my chest, but I stood up taller than I had all week. I spent the morning reviewing every folder, every receipt, and every transcript, my mind as sharp as it had been the day I first stood in front of a classroom. Linda helped me organize my talking points for the upcoming hearing. "Stick to what you know," she said. "What you've seen, what you've heard, what you've lived." I nodded, jotting a few final notes in the margins. I wasn't trying to be eloquent. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to survive. And if my voice shook when I told the truth, then it would shake. But it would not break. By Sunday evening, Helena called to give me one last update before court. "They've submitted a response," she said, her tone dry. "Marcus is claiming that Vanessa manipulated him, not the other way around." I let out a bitter laugh. "He's turning on her already?" "Like clockwork," she confirmed. "We expected it, but it'll help us in court. He's going to try and paint himself as a victim of her influence." "He forged my signature," I said. "No one forced him to do that. And that's why we'll win," Helena said firmly. "Just be honest, be clear, and don't let him rattle you." "He doesn't rattle me anymore," I told her, and I meant it. The night before the hearing, I stood in my bedroom looking at the dress I planned to wear. It was a soft burgundy with a modest neckline and long sleeves, a dress that said dignity, not defeat. Frank had loved this dress, once saying it made me look like I belonged on a courtroom TV drama. "Guess I finally get to use it," I whispered to the empty room. I laid out my scarf, yes, that scarf, on top of the dress like a badge of memory. In the mirror, I practiced what I'd say if asked to speak, my voice quiet but steady. "My name is Dorothy Lambert," I whispered, "and I am not incompetent. I am not forgetful. I am not irrelevant. And I will not be erased." Behind me, my reflection did not blink. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. The morning of the hearing was cold and gray, the sky a dull blanket that matched the tone of the day. I wore the burgundy dress and pinned my scarf neatly beneath my coat, my hands steady as I buttoned each clasp. Linda met me in the hallway with a thermos of tea and a quiet nod, dressed in a simple navy suit that made her look like she belonged in a courtroom, too. We didn't speak much on the drive, the silence filled with anticipation rather than fear. When we arrived, Helena was already waiting near the courthouse entrance, her briefcase at her side and confidence in every line of her face. "You ready?" she asked, looking directly at me. "I've been ready since the day I hid in his back seat," I replied. The courtroom was more crowded this time, and I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood seated in the back. I kept my eyes forward, not out of shame, but because the time for looking back had passed. This was the day everything changed. The judge presiding over the hearing was the same as before, Evelyn Grant, though her expression was markedly more severe now. She reviewed the file in front of her silently for a few minutes before lifting her gaze to Marcus, who sat stiffly at the opposite table. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen, and I wasn't surprised. Helena had informed me she'd invoked her Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify. Marcus wore a charcoal suit and no tie, his collar open, as if to suggest vulnerability. He wouldn't meet my eyes, which told me more than any testimony ever could. This hearing concerns the revocation of power of attorney, restitution for financial misappropriation, and protective orders relating to elder exploitation, Judge Grant began. Her voice echoed through the courtroom with the weight of finality. Helena stood to deliver her opening remarks, laying out our case with practiced precision. I watched Marcus's expression flicker as each piece of evidence was named, like bricks falling around him one by one. Then it was my turn. Helena gave me a small nod, and I rose slowly, walking toward the witness stand with every step grounded in memory. I raised my right hand and took the oath, my voice clear and unwavering. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk said. "Dorothy Evelyn Lambert," I replied. Judge Grant leaned forward slightly as Helena approached. "Mrs. Lambert," Helena said, "can you tell the court what prompted you to begin questioning your son's financial involvement in your affairs?" I inhaled, steadying myself before speaking. "I wanted to surprise my son," I began, but when I saw who was sitting next to him in the car, everything changed. I told the story without embellishment, about the overheard conversation, the forged signatures, the pie in my lap that never made it to the dinner table. I spoke about Frank, about the grief that blurred my judgment, and how Marcus had stepped in during my weakest moment. I admitted my own failings, my trust, my blind spots, and the crushing guilt of realizing the boy I raised had seen me as a target. I described the visit from the Glenwood representative, the forged documents, the financial trails Ruth had uncovered, and the voicemail from Vanessa. Every sentence felt like stitching myself back together, one truth at a time. Helena asked concise, focused questions, guiding me through the timeline we'd prepared so carefully. When she was done, she looked at the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Marcus's attorney stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward me with what I assumed was meant to be a gentle expression. "Mrs. Lambert," he began, "is it possible you misunderstood your son's intentions?" "No," I replied. "It's possible I misunderstood his loyalty, but his intentions were crystal clear." He didn't press much harder after that, just a few lukewarm attempts to cast my actions as paranoid or overly emotional. But the evidence had already spoken louder than anything he could argue. Helena had printed every document, every transaction, every signature that Marcus had tried to hide behind smiles and soft reassurances. When the judge asked if Marcus would like to make a statement, his attorney advised against it. He remained seated, hands clasped, lips a thin line. I watched him closely, searching for some flicker of remorse, but there was only resentment. Resentment that I hadn't rolled over, that I'd had the audacity to fight back. Judge Grant called a brief recess before rendering her decision, and I stepped outside to breathe. Linda followed, placing her hand on my shoulder as we watched the breeze stir the leaves in the courthouse courtyard. No matter what she decides, I said, I'm not sorry. 20 minutes later, we were called back in, and the judge wasted no time. This court finds that Marcus Lambert did knowingly and willfully exploit his legal authority over Dorothy Lambert for personal financial gain. A hushed gasp came from somewhere behind me, followed by silence. The power of attorney is hereby permanently revoked, Judge Grant continued. All assets transferred during the period of control are to be restored, pending a full audit. Additionally, the court recommends the district attorney pursue criminal charges of financial elder abuse and fraud. Helena let out a slow breath beside me, her fingers relaxing around the edge of the table. This court also orders a permanent restraining order against Mr. Lambert, prohibiting contact without legal counsel present. Marcus didn't flinch. He just stared ahead like he'd been waiting for it, like the bottom had finally dropped out beneath him. I remained still, dignified, and silent. This wasn't the moment for victory. It was the moment for closure. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, voices shouting for a comment. Helena shielded me from most of it, but I stopped briefly to say a single sentence. No one should have to defend their right to grow old in peace. Then I turned away and walked down the steps, Linda at my side, each step lighter than the one before. We didn't speak until we reached the car, the door clicking shut behind us like punctuation. You did it, Linda whispered, her eyes shining. We did it, I corrected, and she smiled. That night, back at home, I sat in my kitchen with the lemon pie I'd never gotten to serve. I cut 2 slices, one for me, one for Frank's memory, and raised a glass of cider to the empty chair across from mine. He thought he was writing the end of my story. I said softly, but I'm just getting started. The week after the ruling felt like coming up for air after nearly drowning. Each morning, I'd sit on the porch with my tea, watching the sun climb over the rooftops, and for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for something awful to happen. The phone calls stopped. No more messages from Glenwood, no more aggressive voicemails from Marcus, no more sugar-coated threats from Vanessa. Helena kept me informed as the criminal investigation progressed, but I no longer felt like prey. I felt like a witness with power. Linda stayed through the week, helping me reorganize the office, file documents, and plant spring tulips in the flower beds Frank once adored. The garden bloomed like a promise, full of colors I hadn't noticed in years. I don't know how you stayed this strong, Linda said one morning as we watered the rosebush. I didn't, I replied. I broke 100 times in silence. And then? She asked. Then I put myself back together. Louder. By the end of the month, the forensic audit was complete. Marcus had withdrawn over $214,000 across 3 accounts tied to my name. Each withdrawal staggered, each disguised. Vanessa's fingerprints were all over the transfers, but Marcus had signed every document himself. He'll be charged as the primary, Helena confirmed. Her charges are heavier, but his betrayal runs deeper in the court's eyes. The DA planned to pursue felony elder exploitation and wire fraud, with a recommended sentence of 5 to 10 years. Marcus's attorney requested a plea deal, but Helena said we'd only consider one if full restitution was guaranteed. He's trying to salvage what he can, she said. Too late for salvaging, I replied, staring at a photo of him from years ago on the bookshelf, him in his graduation robe, eyes full of ambition. I didn't feel triumph looking at it. I felt absence. Vanessa vanished from the city 2 days before her court date, but authorities quickly issued a bench warrant. She won't get far, Ruth told us over the phone. Her accounts are frozen, and her passport's flagged. It turned out she had 4 aliases and 2 prior investigations still open in other states. This is her pattern, Helena said. Find, manipulate, vanish. But she misjudged the timeline this time. She thought I'd break before I'd speak. Her mistake was forgetting that old women don't just hold grudges. They hold records, receipts, and community. Linda posted a warning in the Neighborhood Association forum, describing Vanessa's real name, face, and the alias she used. Just in case she tries to reappear under a new story, she said. Someone's got to keep the light on her. Despite everything, I found myself grieving, not for what Marcus had done, but for what would never be again. There would be no more Sunday dinners, no phone calls on my birthday, no more Mother's Day cards signed with love and a lie. I knew if I let myself linger in that grief, it would devour everything I'd fought to rebuild, so I didn't linger. Instead, I repurposed the old guest room into a quiet space filled with light, books, and a writing desk. I started journaling every morning, not to relive what happened, but to write my way into whatever came next. The local community center reached out after hearing my story and asked if I'd speak at a support group for older adults. I said yes, not because I needed to relive the past, but because someone out there might still be where I was, hiding in silence. Maybe I can help her find her voice faster than I found mine. At the first meeting, I wore my cardigan with the stitched hem Frank had always teased me about. The room was filled with men and women, most in their 60s and 70s, some leaning on canes, others gripping folders filled with paperwork they barely understood. I shared my story with measured calm, never crying, never rushing, just delivering the truth like an offering. When I finished, a man in the back raised his hand and asked, "How did you know when it was time to fight back?" I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "The moment I realized they'd already started fighting against me." The room stayed silent for a beat before someone whispered, "Amen." Afterward, 3 people waited to speak with me privately, asking for Helena's contact information. I handed out her card like a lifeline. That night, I slept without waking once. The following week, Helena called with an update. Marcus had agreed to a plea deal. He'll serve a minimum of 3 years in state prison, pay full restitution, and forfeit control of any remaining shared assets, she said. No contact for the duration of the sentence. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the sunlight pouring through the lace curtain. "That's the best outcome we could have hoped for," she added gently. "Yes," I replied. "I just wish it hadn't had to happen at all." "Sometimes justice doesn't feel like justice," Helena said. "It just feels like the least bad ending." "Maybe," I murmured, "but it's still a beginning." After we hung up, I pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. She survived because she told the truth, even when no one wanted to hear it. 3 weeks later, Linda returned home, leaving behind a freezer full of casseroles, a fresh stack of library books, and a tight hug at the train station. "Call me if he even thinks about sending a postcard," she said. "He won't," I replied. "He's got 3 years to think about why." As the train pulled away, I waved and felt a surprising flicker of peace. I wasn't afraid of what came next. Not loneliness, not quiet, not even time. I had rebuilt my house, my name, my story. Marcus may have tried to erase me, but I'd written myself back into every corner of my life. The neighbors began dropping by more often, bringing cookies, books, or just sitting on the porch to talk about gardening. No one mentioned the court case. They just treated me like Dot again, and I let them. I still kept Marcus's photo on the shelf, face turned sideways, not quite facing the room. Not out of love, and not entirely out of hate. I kept it because forgetting him would be too easy, and forgetting is how mistakes begin again. His face reminded me what happens when trust becomes a tool instead of a bond. It reminded me why the truth matters, even when it hurts. I didn't talk to the press again. After the trial, even when they asked, I didn't need the headlines. I had the ending. And I had the beginning too. Because survival isn't just staying alive, it's remembering who you are before they tried to take it from you. Summer arrived slowly, curling its warmth around the garden, like a familiar embrace. The tulips bloomed early this year, and for the first time in ages, I remembered to water them on schedule. Every morning, I stepped out barefoot onto the porch, tea in hand, letting the quiet fill all the places grief once lived. The house no longer felt haunted by whispers and fears. It breathed again, as if relieved to be loved by someone who wouldn't sell it for convenience. I'd replaced the old curtains with brighter ones, filled the kitchen with music from Frank's old radio, and opened the windows wider than before. Sometimes I even danced slow, awkward little steps while stirring soup or dusting bookshelves. I wasn't trying to be young again. I was simply learning what it meant to feel free. Not safe because someone said I was, but because I had made it so. And not alone because no one came, but alone by choice, surrounded by dignity and peace. One Sunday afternoon, the community center hosted a luncheon in honor of elder advocates. Helena was the keynote speaker, and she insisted I sit at her table, front and center. I wore my burgundy dress again, now with a sunflower brooch pinned near the collar. "You started a wave, Dot," she said, lifting her glass. "You gave people permission to speak." 3 more elders had come forward in the past month with similar stories. Quiet, dignified people who had nearly been swept aside by their own children or caregivers. As I sat among them, I realized I hadn't just survived something painful. I had become part of something greater. A movement built not on rage, but on courage and clarity. When Helena handed me the microphone for closing remarks, my fingers trembled slightly, but my voice did not. "We are not burdens," I said. "We are the roots holding everything up." After the event, Ruth invited me out for coffee at a small cafe near the courthouse. We sat at a table by the window, watching college students rush past with backpacks and iced drinks. "You know," she said, stirring her espresso, "this whole case reminded me why I got into this field in the first place." I smiled, watching the steam rise from my cup. "Because you like fighting injustice?" "Because my grandmother gave me her signature on a form when I was 21, she replied, "and I could have ruined her if I'd wanted to." That truth sat between us for a long second, honest and heavy. "But you didn't?" I said. "No," Ruth replied, "because she raised me to know better." I guess Marcus forgot who raised him. The week after the luncheon, I received a letter from Marcus. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, the postmark from a county correctional facility 2 hours south. I stood at the kitchen counter, holding it, the paper light but the weight of it immense. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for 2 full days before finally slicing the top open with my letter opener. Frank's, old and brass, still sharp. The letter was written in Marcus's familiar handwriting, neat and slightly slanted, like it had always been when he wanted something. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't deny what he'd done. He simply said, "I never thought you'd fight back, and I'm sorry it took that for me to see you clearly." I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I kept Frank's wedding band and my first Mother's Day card. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something like a comma, not a period. Vanessa, as it turned out, had been arrested in Arizona while trying to use a fake identity to access a locked bank account. Her charges were federal now: cross-state fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Helena called me with the news and asked if I wanted to be present at her sentencing. "No," I said without hesitation. "That chapter's already closed." "I thought you'd say that," Helena replied. "But just so you know, she's facing at least 15 years. I didn't rejoice. I didn't celebrate. I just walked into the garden that evening and pulled the last of the weeds near the sunflowers. Some things are better healed in silence. As autumn approached, the air grew crisp, and the leaves turned to copper and gold. Linda returned for a weekend visit, bringing homemade cinnamon bread and 2 paperbacks she thought I'd like. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the wind tangle itself in the trees. "You ever hear from anyone else in Marcus's life?" she asked. "No," I replied. "His business folded after the audits. Most of his clients dropped him once the case went public." She shook her head, eyes scanning the quiet street. "What a waste." "Not for me," I said. "I learned how strong I am when no one came to help." The community center started a small initiative in my name, the Lambert Line, a dedicated phone service for seniors needing legal referrals, emotional support, or just a safe place to ask questions. I volunteered to take the first few calls every Monday morning. The voices that came through were often trembling, sometimes confused, sometimes angry, always grateful. I didn't offer them miracles. I offered them options, tools, and a voice that told them, "You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. And you are not alone. In some ways, it felt like I was still teaching. Only now, the lesson was about resilience, not arithmetic. That, to me, was the greatest legacy I could leave behind. On the last Sunday of October, I hosted a small gathering in the backyard. Just neighbors, friends, and a few volunteers from the center. I baked lemon pie again, and this time, someone actually got to eat it. A neighbor brought a golden retriever puppy that ran laps around the garden, while children chased it in shrieking delight. We played old records, drank cider, and lit sparklers once the sun went down. As I looked around, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A life not just lived, but shared. A life reclaimed, not handed over. Frank would have been proud of the garden, the music, and especially the pie. And I knew he would have stood beside me the way Linda did now, smiling with a plate in her hand, and a quiet kind of pride in her eyes. Before everyone left, a little girl named Sophie tugged on my sleeve. She was 5, missing 2 front teeth, and holding a crumpled drawing of what looked like a very lopsided sunflower. "This is for you," she said, thrusting it into my hands. "My mom said you're like a warrior, Grandma." I laughed, the sound caught somewhere between a choke and a burst of light. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "I'll put it on my fridge." As she skipped away, I stood there holding the paper, watching stars prick the dark sky above. I thought about the story I'd lived, the scars I'd gathered, and the pages I'd written with every step I refused to take backward. I was not the woman they thought they could erase. I was the woman who rewrote the ending. And this time, no one else held the pen. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you leave, there's another story similar to the one you just watched. You'll see it on the top left of your screen.